So the format that we're going to have here is we're going to have Marlon from the planning department has a short presentation to start off, and then we're going to have panel discussion. And so my name is Jesse O'Sullivan. I'm policy counsel here at Circulate San Diego. We're a nonprofit think tank dedicated to creating excellent mobility choices in vibrant, healthy neighborhoods. And we have two of our other participants here, Marlon and Manny, who I'll let introduce themselves. Dike should be here at some point, but he's not on the call yet. But hopefully by the time Marlon finishes his presentation, Dike will have arrived. So I'll pass it off to Manny. Can you introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, my name is Manny Rodriguez, and I am on the CPG for downtown. I also have my nonprofit called WalknRoll San Diego, where we make educational reels and guided tours and presentations around town about better street design that's safer for everyone, whether you bike, walk, roll, or drive. Pass it over to Marlon.
Hi, everybody. Marlon Pangilinan with the planning department. I am the interim program coordinator.
Great. Thanks for being here. And why don't you take it away with the presentation?
Excellent. Okay. All right. Does everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, great. All right. So again, Marlon Pangilinan, interim program coordinator with the City of San Diego Planning Department. Just a little background on myself. I've been in the planning department for 21 years, working in community planning. And currently I'm working in the public engagement section of the department, focusing on community planning group reform and coordination. So the topic for today's Lunch and Learn deals with how to get involved in the planning process or in community planning. We have in place several traditional ways that the public. Oh, is everyone seeing my presentation still?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yes, my other screen just kind of went black, which is weird. Okay, we have traditional ways that the public can provide input, as well as other innovative ways for the public to engage in city programs and projects. Starting at the top, some of the obvious things are public hearings, where we see the public provide public testimony. This is typically at, council, planning commission, the hearing officer, and also at our city council subcommittees like land use and housing, which provide direction of staff and recommendations to city council. Community-based organizations, or CBOs, these are typically your nonprofit, non-governmental, or charitable organizations that represent community needs and work with the communities that they're based in on certain issues and topics like community health advocacy, education, team support organizations, etc. And then we also have our community planning groups. And I think everyone here is pretty familiar with the advisory role of our planning groups and the role of representing the respective communities on land use matters. They've been around since the 60s and 70s, and I'll be talking about the status of our planning groups in an upcoming slide. And then last, we have emails, letters, phone calls, kind of our traditional avenues for providing input that are still, relevant today. Since, Hey,
Marlon, I'm sorry to jump in. Can you stop share and reshare? It's not showing up right for me. I'm not sure if that's what's happening for everybody else, but let's just redo it to make sure.
Okay, just making sure everything's here. Okay, let's try this again. Screen share. How's that? If you are sharing your screen.
Great, thank you.
Perfect. Sorry about that, guys. So as I mentioned, other innovations that we're looking at in terms of garnering community input and community participation are online forums, community engagement tools where we create and inform land use scenarios, as well as provide surveys that are meant to solicit broad input and engagement in digital formats as well, which is very convenient, especially for folks, who don't have the time, but still allows us to get broad input. We still do in-person events, and we utilize multiple approaches to getting public input. But the best way to get involved and to know what's going on is to sign up for our updates on each of our projects on our web pages. Timelines for certain programs are also beneficial. They show kind of where various points in our process where the public can provide input. This is an example taken from our Blueprint San Diego webpage. Blueprint San Diego, or Blueprint SD, is our update to our general plan that aligns all our objectives for providing more opportunities for homes and public spaces near transit with our climate action goals. So in this example, we have a citywide survey that's currently open on Blueprint with upcoming opportunities to provide feedback on the draft general plan amendment, the environmental document, and to provide comment at hearings and meetings. So in regards to community planning group reform, Council Policy 600-24 is the council policy that governs the role and responsibilities of our community planning groups. This was amended last fall. It came out of a result of the San Diego County Grand Jury report and a performance audit that was conducted by our city auditor that reported on the effectiveness of our community planning groups. That was also followed up by a legal analysis by our city attorney's office indicating that the structure of our planning groups as advisory groups conflicted with the city charter in that they aren't created by ordinance, nor are their duties set forth by ordinance or by the charter, and that they aren't appointed by the mayor or confirmed by city council. To address this, the planning groups would need to be recognized as independent legal groups. So this is the kind of main topic of the amendment to the council policy. And so an application process was established with the adoption of that amendment. And that's currently what we're implementing now. The process does allow for new groups to apply to represent a planning area. And then we're putting together an outreach program that will include an information session, public workshops, act like clinics to help with the application process, as well as individualized assistance provided by one of our consultants. In terms of the overall process, the applications are due at the end of the year, and then staff will be bringing these applications forward to City Council in the spring of 2004 for recognition. Equity Forward is another one of our opportunities for public input. It's a comprehensive approach to creating a more equitable, healthy, and enjoyable place for all San Diegans. The evolving policies and plans and processes under Equity Forward will create more equitable opportunities and investments in the city by acknowledging the effects of policy decisions that have resulted in inequitable outcomes. Equity Forward will leverage the diversity of voices in our city to benefit all San Diegans. Here are the topic areas for Equity Forward. Each of the areas have their own specific initiatives. Under environmental justice, we have the environmental justice element, which is a new element of the general plan. Environmental justice, by definition, ensures that people of all races, cultures, and incomes are equally and equitably valued, protected, and served by our city. This includes regulations and policies that impact the quality of the environment around us, such as transportation, parks, natural spaces, city services, and the overall use of land. In the park and open space area, it'll involve the Choice Creek Watershed Park Master Plan and Trails Master Plan that will increase equitable access to public parks, open space, as well as a parks needs index. And the Park Needs Index will provide a metric to help prioritize park investments in areas with the greatest need. In the inclusive community engagement area, we will have a capital improvement program or CIP project prioritization and streamlining of the infrastructure delivery process, as well as the inclusive public engagement guide, which I'll discuss in an upcoming slide. Area in regards to high impact public spaces involves working with outside organizations like philanthropies and nonprofits. So we're calling this initiative Partnering for Progress to identify opportunities for greater efficiency, coordination, and cooperation when it comes to developing park spaces. So to stay informed and involved, we have a general timeline on the webpage that shows when these various initiatives will be taking place, as well as an intake form available on the Equity Forward webpage, that's sandiego.gov/equityforward, for people wanting to participate so they can detail how much time they'd want to dedicate and how they want to be involved. The citywide inclusive public engagement guide will serve as the foundation for city employees to implement a meaningful public engagement program that provides guidelines for how city decisions consider input from community members representative of the population's demographics, that these decisions ultimately improve San Diegans' quality of life. The guide is focused on building trust, transparency, and desired outcomes. This is a guide that will serve as a toolkit for inclusive engagement for every single department. So not just planning department, be like transportation, stormwater, public utilities, and so forth. It will include new strategies to reach people facing barriers to traditional forms of participation, like attending, hearings and public meetings, and truly be representative of the community. I also want to mention that there is a focused discussion group that we are forming. So we're looking for 10 to 15 community members who will share lived experiences and perspectives on community engagement. And these meetings will occur, during this calendar year between April through June. There's an application link on the Public Engagement Guide website, and applications are due April 4th next month. Other ways to get involved and stay connected on this initiative, there is an online survey available to fill out and get some input. We have fact sheets available to share, and then you can always sign up for updates on the Inclusive Public Engagement Guide website. I also wanted to share another resource for the public to be involved in planning, and that's pretty much the information that's on our website. We have a webpage about what's going on in our department in terms of where a lot of the projects are at in their process, like plan updates and other initiatives that I mentioned. So you can find the most up-to-date information of all these things that we're working on, their status, and learn more about them. And that pretty much concludes my presentation on how everyone can get involved in a number of programs that my department's working on. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Marlon. And I just want to take a second to plug again that Equity Forward group. Again, the applications are due on April 4th. If you're interested in getting involved in the planning process and you're interested in a process that makes sure that we include all sorts of different voices, not just the kinds of people who have time to show up to certain meetings, or really making sure that we're meeting people where they are and getting a sample that represents the community. So that link's in the chat. Hit it if you're interested. Fill out your application now before you forget about it. Okay, so moving on to the question and answer part of our discussion here. First, why don't we have Dike? Why don't you introduce yourself since you signed on? We missed you in our introductions at the beginning.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me. My name is Dike, and I serve as the chair of the Midway-Pacific Highway Community Planning Group. I think I joined the board initially in 2018, just as a normal board member, then spent 2 years as vice chair, and then became chair about a year ago. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So why don't we start off, Dike and Manny, by sort of talking about the different ways that you've been involved in the city's planning process. Manny, do you want to go first?
Yeah, there's several ways that I've been involved so far. Many of them Marlon already mentioned. The very basic things you could do is get public comment at city council or at one of their special committees. I'm also part of the downtown community planning group. So, and there I, get to work with the rest of the downtown board to, influence how development will look like in downtown, and, make sure that, the built environment works for everyone. And I'm also a co-founder of WalknRoll San Diego, which is a nonprofit here in San Diego that we educate the public on good street design. And that's planning through an educational lens. So we make informational reels or videos on social media, and we also have given guided tours and presentations at events like Design Week and Escucha, and to educate the public on good street design and kind of let them know, and also for those that are interested, we meet at these places, we refer them to resources like how to get involved in your planning group. And one other way or notable way I would say I'm involved is through the local business improvement district. A lot of neighborhoods have business improvement districts. And so it's basically an organization of businesses who all pay a fee. And these business improvement districts, they can actually implement infrastructure in your neighborhoods, like lighting on the streets or landscaping, or, they can even close down the streets to hold events, for example, like the North Park Farmers Market. or the Little Italy Farmers Market. So that's one way to get involved in planning. And sometimes you don't have to work or own a business to be involved. A lot of times they'll include local residents who are knowledgeable in the community or have good skills to offer. So I'll pass it over to Dike so he can talk about his involvement.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Manny. And yeah, similarly, I think obviously public comment, whether it's at council or committee, is always a good thing, and a good way to sort of directly engage with the folks who make decisions on policy in the region. And also planning commission is another avenue where folks can sometimes go in and make sure that their voices are heard. For me personally, outside of the planning group and some of these things that have already been talked about, I try to subscribe to as many different newsletters. I think Marlon mentioned a couple different resources that his department puts out. I get too many emails, and to be fair, I don't read every single one of them, but I for sure scan the headline. And like I said, just kind of making sure that you're immersed in that sort of stream of information is definitely something that I would recommend. Outside of that, I spend a lot of times actually with the ME Democrats of San Diego County. So it's sort of like, it's a club technically, but it's a policy sort of housing land use focused club, right? And so through that organization, they've done a lot of, I think, education. They meet on a sort of a monthly basis, but a big part of what they try to do is match action with education, right? And so we'll talk about a thing, we'll learn about a thing, we try to invite speakers out to speak with the group and bring everyone up to speed. And then at the end of the day, yeah, there's always that mechanism for action there. So I think those are some of the most important ways that I'd say I've been involved in. And then also I think when you are aware of any sort of activity that's going on, for example, in Midway, we have this whole sports arena thing, and that's a major project. Yes, it is technically within the the planning area for our planning group, but this is a project of regional significance. And so being aware of how the city is structured and how the different I guess authority figures that have any sort of decision-making ability in that process, how those are all set up, trying to either be helpful or sometimes be, like I said, tactful in how you share your messaging, or how you should, maybe even ask a question about, a financing mechanism or something. There's a number of different ways that you can stay involved and I'd say influence the planning process.
Great. Thanks for that answer. And your answer, you mentioned subscribing to newsletters, and I found that that's a really effective way to stay on top of what's going on at the city. It can be a lot. You can get separate email updates for every one of the city council's committees, and for the city council itself, and for the planning commission. And I think the planning department has its own newsletter as well. So there's a whole bunch of different newsletters that you can sign up for. But to be fair, there's a lot going on at the city, and it's a lot for anybody to keep track of. So signing up for those emails can at least, you can take the 30 seconds it takes to skim it and decide whether anything's interesting to you or not. Dike, I was hoping you might talk a little bit about the height limit in Midway and your involvement in that.
Yeah, that was a serious one. So like I said, I joined the planning group in 2018. At that point, we were just wrapping up our community plan update. So unfortunately for us, it took 11 years from start to finish. So I see some of these things in UC and all these, they're moving, but not quite as slowly as ours did. And so like I said, when I joined, we basically finalized the completion of that community plan. What I didn't realize is that during the process of drafting that community plan, the question around this 30-foot height limit had come up, and there was an attempt to try to address it in the community plan process. And so let me zoom out actually briefly just to kind of frame this a little bit better. So for those of you who don't know, since 1972, the city of San Diego, and I'd say up until 2020, 2022, the city of San Diego had a long-standing moratorium against new construction of buildings taller than 30 feet north of downtown and west of the 5 freeway. And so like I said, for us in our planning group, when we went about going to and update our community plan, we weren't able to address that constraint in the planning process because of how it was initially voted in. So the next order of business, as soon as we finalized our community plan update in 2018, was to address it in the way that we had at our disposal, which is a citywide vote in the November 2020 election. And so, like I said, obviously a lot changed even between March of 2020 and November of 2020. But ultimately, myself, at the time I was vice chair, Kathy Kenton, who was our chair, we worked quite closely with the city council representative, Dr. Jen from District 2. And she worked with Chris Kate, who at the time was the District 6 representative and also chaired the city's economic development committee. in order to docket this ballot measure for consideration for the entirety of the city of San Diego. And ultimately, Kathy and myself, we wound up serving as what they call the principal officer for that ballot measure campaign at the invitation of the council member. And so we spent basically that entire year, all of 2020 really, and truly advocating, right? Like I said, in conjunction with the city council, in conjunction with, I think even the mayor's office at that time was supportive. And frankly, because of the sports and redevelopment that at that time was still sort of forthcoming, there was sort of this collective recognition that, you know, we needed to deal with this constraint legally in a way that would enable the city to maximize what it wanted to do on that sports arena site. So I'd say really the common denominator in all of this was collaboration, right? Between, like I said, the planning group level, the city council office, the mayor's office, a number of different folks all came together to build out, you know, what ultimately was a truly successful campaign in November 2020. I think we had like 57.5% or so of the vote in a presidential election. And that was something that to this day, I think, you know, a lot of us are still really proud of that work that we put in that year.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I think that's such a good example of, well, in one sense, how complicated it can get, but in another sense, how many avenues there are for participation, and that the community planning group and the community plan update is linked to this broader city charter provision, which then goes to city council, and you get this ballot measure on the ballot, and each step along the way, there's opportunities to be involved, whether it's speaking to your city council person, attending those community plan update or community planning group meetings, or participating in a campaign to get a ballot measure passed. Those are all different avenues, depending on what you're interested in, that can be ways to be a part of the planning process. Let's see. I guess we've talked a bit about community planning groups, but we haven't yet answered the basic question of what is a community planning group and what is its role in the planning process. Marlon, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, work with planning groups for over 20 years. There are representative bodies that provide, you know, community input and their positions on land use matters in the city. So that's kind of how I've always looked at them.
Right. Manny, Dike, you have any thoughts to add to that?
Yeah, I would just add that, you know, all of these planning groups are volunteer based, and the membership of these various different groups, in order to qualify to sit on one of these boards, you either need to live in the boundaries of a community planning area, own property in one of those planning areas, or represent a business that's based there. So the perspective that everyone brings when they sit at that table, like I said, is that of either a property owner, a resident, a business owner. And obviously a lot of people who are, say, homeowners, they qualify in both camps, but you know, they come with that perspective. And so I think what's really important is that, one, these entities are advisory. You know, we don't really have any authority. I think one thing that I definitely learned and continue to learn is that, you know, we only have as much authority as the city is willing to acknowledge, right? And so we're advisory. And that's a really important thing to kind of keep in mind. But at the end of the day, I think these planning groups really have been for a long time a real conduit for community sentiment, community feedback, for that expert eye. You know, because these different planners, I mean, they have such a wide swath, right? They have a very, I think, wide portfolio of responsibilities, and there's no way that they're going to have the intimacy, the level of intricate knowledge of any given community. You know, and that's why those of us who reside or, you know, own property or you know, represent a business that's based, our voices are really important. And I think that the city is only benefited, I think, from having planning groups in the grand scheme of things. But you know, I recognize that not all planning groups are quite the exact same.
Cool. And just to pitch to everybody on getting involved in your community planning group, you can go and start attending those community planning group meetings. You can run to be on your community planning group. And then also with the new reforms that came into play last year, those don't take effect until the end of this year, but starting next year, every community planning group will have to make sure that anybody who resides in that community planning area can vote. In the past, there were requirements that you had to attend meetings before you were allowed to vote. In the future, that won't be the case. So that means that you don't have to, there's no extra requirements. It's like vote, you don't have to attend a city council meeting to vote for your city council person. You don't have to attend a community planning group meeting to go and vote. So if you're a very busy person, you don't have time to attend your community planning group regularly, you can find out who's running and you can make your voice heard by voting for those representatives on that community planning group. Speaking of which, community planning group reform is coming into play at the end of the year. Marlon, you gave us the overview of how the city is thinking about that, but for Manny and Dike, I was wondering whether your respective community planning groups are looking ahead to seeking recognition from the city starting next year, and what the plans are there. And maybe you haven't, it is, you know, it's over 6 months away, so there's time. But Manny, you want to take that one first?
Yeah, so, you know, that's a big thing coming for community planning groups. The chair of my group and I have been in talks with, you know, our elected reps about like, hey, you know, kind of just begging them for a guideline that we can use to just easily implement reforms to the bylaws. But right now what it's looking like is that we're gonna have to read these laws and kind of become kind of lawyers and figure out how to adjust our bylaws. Unless Marlon and his department want to provide us with, you know, a little cheat sheet on how to reform our bylaws, that'd be amazing. But we got that coming up. And I think what we're going to be focusing in the short term is on making our planning groups representative of the community. Like if I do recall correctly, from the CPG reforms, any group can apply to be the community planning group for a community. So if, for example, if our planning group was all, you know, white homeowners in their 80s, there's probably a good chance that they might not apply, they might not qualify to be the community planning group of another community group that has a diverse range of people and ages and ethnicities. They might be more eligible to become the planning group. So, you know, our board has changed a lot in the past year with me and some of my friends and some people that we're bringing along. We're trying to increase, you know, the amount of women in our board and, you know, kind of bring along younger people and trying to become more representative of the community. I think that's a good thing that our elected body represents the community that the self. So I think that's in the short term, we're going to be looking into that, finding out ways to promote the community planning group because we have elections every year. So how can we promote this to younger folks and more women, particularly in our community?
Great.
Yeah.
Before you jump in on that, Dike, I just want to mention I'm seeing a couple of hands. We are going to be taking audience questions, but we're going to be taking them through the chat. And that'll be after I get through my questions here. So go ahead and type those questions in the chat and we'll get to them when we have a chance. Go ahead, Dike.
Cool, thank you. And yeah, no, I mean, the short answer is yes, we're very well aware of the fact that we need to resubmit not just our bylaws, but a number of different forms of documentation. And that is something that's been the focus of our group this year already. I think Marlon was good enough to come, I want to say in February, if I'm not mistaken, and speak to our group and give that update. He's been to the CPC a number of times, and that, for those of you who don't know, is the Community Planners Committee. There's 42 different planning groups, and once a month, we all meet once a month, but once a month there's one representative from each of those groups that goes to a sort of citywide gathering of planning group representatives. And so I've seen Marlon there too. And so, yes, I think at the moment, some of the I guess the challenge that we've endured to date is that the guidance from the city has not yet been public. I heard April. And so we're here at the end of March. So, you know, any day now is kind of what I'm expecting or anticipating as far as, you know, what are the application, what are the documents, what is the rubric, what are the guidelines that we're really talking about here? You know, I know there's a lot of consternation and, you know, perhaps even fear across the rest of the city and other planning groups that, yeah, there could be other, you know, sort of, I don't know if the sleeper cell is the right word, but other sort of competing groups coming up and replacing the existing groups, the ones who have been in place for many, many years. And, you know, that's not something that in Midway is of true concern to me personally, but I do want to know a lot more than I do currently know about what it is that's going to be required of us in order to seek that recognition. So yes, we plan to seek that recognition, but some of the challenge that we've endured, like I said so far, is just we don't know what it's going to take from us, not definitively.
Yeah, hopefully that uncertainty can be resolved soon. Can you guys talk a little bit about community planning group elections? just what that looks like and how somebody might get involved either to vote or to run?
Yeah, Manny, you want me to do them? I can do this. So I think citywide, every March, it's sort of historically, traditionally, every planning group holds its elections. As I understand it, different groups have different sort of size boards. I'll talk about Midway. Our board seats 12 members, and we have every year 4 seats that are up for election for a 3-year term. And so we kind of have like a rolling every year we have 4 seats that come up. And so we try to keep it fresh in that way, try to keep it balanced. One of the real challenges that we have in Midway, though, from an election standpoint, is that we typically actually have had vacancies on our board. And so when someone's term sort of expires, it's not a contested like, hey, am I running against someone who wants to replace me? It's, I'm still here, I'm still committed to this community. Our bylaws allow for the existing board members to basically, confirm someone or appoint someone technically to our group. So we haven't had, like I said, a contested election in the entirety of my time, almost 5 years now on this board. But like I said, that's something that's specific to Midway because I think of the composition of our community compared to some of the other communities across the rest of the city.
Yeah, and that's a good place to point out that different community planning groups are really, really different from each other. As Dike mentioned, in the size of the board, in terms of the composition of the board, in terms of residents versus property owners versus business owners, and also in terms of how those elections play out. Some of the Uptown Community Planning Group elections have been really hotly contested. And as Dike is saying, they haven't had a contested election at all in Midway. So those dynamics can play out really, really differently. You can go to the city website to find out what community planning area you're in, and check out the community planning group to find more what specifically goes on in your community planning group. I'm going to go to audience questions in just a second here, but before I do that, I did just want to plug another way that you can get involved in the community planning process is to get involved in Circulate San Diego. We do a lot of advocacy around issues of making more housing, making our streets safer, making our public transportation better. A lot of that's really, really closely related to community planning. And we do have opportunities where we ask people to show up at public meetings and to make their voices heard. And so if you're interested in the work that we do, sign up on our website for emails, come to our mixers, and watch out for when we have more opportunities to get involved. Let's see. So going to the audience questions from Mark Johnson, we have current CPGs are voted in by election. How will other groups apply or attempt to replace them if they aren't elected in an open, auditable way? Will competing groups be subject to election to ensure that the broadest representation is achieved? I'm going to turn that one over to Marlon.
Yeah, so we kind of find ourselves in a kind of a different situation where we just pretty much, a lot of the groups have concluded their elections, and we've told the planning groups to follow their current bylaws until they're recognized under the new council policy. So they would be they have conducted their elections per their current bylaws. And so by the end of this year, we're expecting applications from existing and also new groups to come forward who want to represent each and every planning area in the city. In the case, let's theoretically think about it, like if say a new group came and they were supported as the representation or the representative group over an existing group, they would come forward with their current body and have their own election procedures that would then kick in place once the next, I guess, annual election comes into being. So in essence, we would be looking at who currently is making up the composition of the group, and that's the group that would be going forward. So whether it be the existing group or a new group if they're selected, and then going through the process of electing those individuals. So I guess the concern of the question is, is it possible that if a new group is selected to represent a community, would they have the vote of, say, the constituency, that has actually been around for the existing planning group? And the answer would probably be no, because this is a new group. And so that's something we need to look at when we're looking at the composition of the membership of the group, and part of the application process, which we will be providing next month, we'll be getting into a little bit more detail about who's on this group and their expertise and what they represent.
All right, thanks for that answer. And then also, if I'm understanding right, once a group is recognized, it will have to have a new election, a new open election very shortly after that recognition. Is that correct?
It would be during the
Right.
month of March, when the annual elections take place.
Right. And then it's ultimately up to city council to recognize community planning groups, correct?
Correct. Yeah, they would be recognizing the groups. Yes.
Cool. Lou Relling asks if when there are competing CPG proposals to represent a planning area, how will the city evaluate proposals from non-elected groups with no history compared to existing groups? So how are you making those determinations?
That's a good question. So we're developing some evaluative criteria right now, which we will be providing next month when the application process is unveiled or provided. But we are looking at, groups' commitment to diversity and representation or inclusiveness. That's one of the main things that are just basically kind of our guide. When the reforms were adopted, the resolution did mention that that's what the city council would be looking at when the groups both existing and new groups come forward.
All right, I see a question from Clifford, which I think is on, I'm hoping is basically answered by the things that you just said. If it's not, feel free to type a new question in the chat and I'll get to that. A question from Naveau. Dike emphasized that CPGs are advisory, but CPGs are still involved in processes, for example, discretionary approval of certain projects or involving community plan updates. How should CPG members consider their roles in these processes? One thing that I should mention here is that the community planning groups have historically had been an official part of the city process, and a recommendation from the community planning group has been required for certain things. A lot of that has changed under the reforms, and the reason for that was that the city charter says that advisory bodies that are officially part of the city have to be appointed by the mayor. And so going forward, the options essentially were either you have the mayor appoint all the community planning group members, which nobody really wants, or you have community planning group elections be official elections that go through all of the usual requirements that we think of when we think of a city council election or something like that, which is an onerous process, requires financial disclosures, all that sort of thing. Or you make the community planning groups more independent, which means removing their sort of official powers in those process. That doesn't mean that the community planning groups can't make a recommendation. It doesn't mean that the city's not going to listen to them anymore. It just means that they're not official parts of those processes. But that said, anybody in the group want to elaborate on that? On how CPG members should consider their role in those processes?
Yeah, I don't think that your role changes really. You're a representative of the community that you're sort of in that seat to represent, right? And so, to Jesse's point, maybe some of the I guess real hooks or the opportunity, the real like mechanisms, levers of power, like aren't quite there. But one thing I'm actually curious about, and I don't know this, and we might not see this in Midway for some time since we just updated our community plan. But going further forward, my understanding was that planning groups would still be involved in community plan updates when those things came around. And so that's, sort of maybe a distinction between project approvals versus, that process of ultimately kind of crafting the community plan. That is, I think, at its core, the most important thing that planning groups do. It's first the sort of the planning, like the adoption of that plan, and then ultimately the implementation, right? And so for us at Midway, we recently adopted a new plan, and our focus since then has been on implementation of the new plan, primarily because it really did make a significant change to the land use policies of our community compared to our previous plan. I don't know how that's going to look going forward for other groups.
Let's see, Lou asks, have any CPGs?
Jesse,
Sorry.
can I answer to that?
Yeah, go for it.
Well? So, you know, we're not, the new reforms will not officially make us, or I guess, make us more independent and make that developers are suggested to come to community planning groups. And I think it's really important to know they're not required anymore to come to community planning groups. And I think community planning groups should keep that in mind, because I see a lot of community planning groups that are very hostile towards anybody who comes to develop anything. And, you know, so that will just lead to developers not coming at all to the community planning group. And when they don't come at all, you have no voice at all. I think of an example of like this new building that came up in Bankers Hill, really tall building, and there's like no lampposts around the building. It's pitch black at night. And I think that if the community planning group would have worked with the developer to get an amenity out of that building, rather than just fighting it and like suing it and whatnot, then they could have gotten some amenities out of it. But because some community planning groups like don't take a collaborative approach, developers just won't collaborate with you. So I think it's something to keep in mind, especially once we're not a requirement for developers to come, is to keep an open dialogue with developers, even if you don't like them. Just always invite them, always treat them friendly. You don't have to approve what they want at the end of the day, but if you at least bring them to the table, you can at least ask for like, hey, can you at least build a light post on your block? You know, in a $200 million thing, some lighting around the block is like a rounding error in their development. So, you know, something to keep in mind for anyone in planning groups and willing to join planning groups. Try to build lines of communication with anyone, developers or homeowners or whatever, so that you can at least bring them to the table and get any, you know, amenities out of them.
Next question from Lou Relling, have any CPGs actually required folks to attend meetings in order to vote? As Manny stated, in Uptown, folks only had to attend meetings in order to run for a seat on the board. The answer there is yes. I don't know the answer off the top of my head as to which groups. There's 42 of them. I don't remember, but I actually do know that in Uptown, when the bylaws, at least the bylaws that were posted online a couple of years ago when I looked at them, the bylaws stated that you did have to attend meetings in order to vote. And that was what the written bylaws said. I don't know whether that was actually enforced, but that was what was in the written bylaws for the Uptown Community Planning Group.
Yeah, in some instances there were requirements for if you were to be a eligible candidate to run for a planning group seat, you would have to have attended a certain number of meetings, like anywhere from 1 to 3 or something like that in the past bylaw shell. Some other planning groups had other specific operating procedures that dictated eligibility for people who have voting capability to vote in their elections too. So that was also another detail in the last council policy.
Mark asks how the city would determine which group wins. I think you're asking about if there is a situation where there's another group that's seeking recognition besides the existing community planning group. And again, that goes to city council, and the planning department will be publishing guidelines next month. I think we've covered that as much as we can. I mean, I know we haven't given a perfect answer to that, but hopefully when the planning department guidelines are published, there'll be more details on how this city intends to consider that. And then also ultimately that's a city council decision, and the city council gets to decide how they decide. Zach asks, how will the CPG reforms address low voter turnout in CPG elections? CPGs purport to represent communities and claim legitimacy via elections. However, low voter turnout calls us into question. As an example, I live in Uptown, which has about 40,000 eligible voters, yet the most recent turnout numbers in Uptown CPG election was less than 500 votes, or about 1%. Given these low numbers, why should the Uptown CPG be recognized as representative of the group of Uptown? I think I'm gonna pass on passing any judgments on Uptown specifically, but I will say that is an issue that was sought to be addressed by the community planning group reforms. You know, Uptown actually has really high turnout compared to many of the other community planning groups. And so I think it is a real concern that of how we consider a community planning group as a representative body, given those low numbers. And also in particular, you know, Dike, I don't want to cast any shade on Midway. I really appreciate the work that you do there, but if there's a community planning group that has a hard time even finding people to serve on it, I think there's a fair question of how you know that group actually represents the interests of the community. And so the elimination of any requirement to attend a group in order to vote is one of those things. The reforms also require that every community planning group will develop an outreach plan to try to get more participation. But yeah, I'll turn that over to anybody who wants to talk more about how to make sure that CPGs really represent their communities.
Yeah, I think, you know, Jesse, definitely no offense taken. It's fair. That's a question I raise all the time. And to be fair, I mean, even, you know, talking about Measure E, you know, when you actually look at the voter turnout for Midway, it wasn't like a landslide victory for the Midway district itself. You know, I think I remember I was talking on the trail at one point, you know, as leaders, you do have to sort of get out in front of folks and show the way and sort of lead, right? So I don't necessarily expect everyone to do all of what we do. But I think that the best way that we can try to be reflective of the community is by, like I said, I mean, I live in the neighborhood. I see my neighbors. I talk to them. We have, you know, like a Facebook group for our complex. We have a next door group for our complex. I'm sharing articles all the time. You know, I cultivate comments. I ask people for their opinions. And I try to at least keep my fingers on the pulse of the community so that I'm coming in not just with, hey, this is what Dike wants, but this is what at least I know my friends, my neighbors, my roommates, etc. are interested in. You know, I go to the coffee shop all the time. You know, honestly, frankly, one of the things that I'm kind of proud of that we did in Midway is, you know, like I said, we have vacancies, and so I'm constantly recruiting. You know, one of the folks who owns like a coffee shop in town in our neighborhood, I was able to pull him onto the board. And I said, look, man, like, you have a coffee shop. Can I post signage here? Can I leave pamphlets here? You know, when you're making small talk with customers, can you just get a sense for what people are thinking? What are they feeling? Right? And can you report out to us, like, when we meet, you know, what's the pulse? What's the, like, what are the people saying? So there's a lot of just, like, I think, deliberate, like, intentionality that needs to go into this, right? Like I said, these are volunteer roles. There's not a lot of reward in it. There's not a lot of glory, but there's a lot of work, right? And so you just kind of have to be constantly aware of the fact that, one, this is not just about what, like I said, what me, Dike wants. This is about the wider community. But at the same time, you know, balance that with the fact, you know, the point of the fact that you are in that seat, right? You are in that role. You do have the ability to speak your mind. And ideally, you know, when you are maybe going through a contested election, you know, you have to have a platform, or you have to have some level of, you know, communications about what your intentions are, right? And so there's that accountability that you have, one, by saying, hey, you know, this is what I'm running for this seat for. And then two, you know, there's that accountability factor. Like I said, you know, if I'm not doing what I set out to do, I expect that I'll be replaced, right? And I think that's also part of what needs to be considered when you go about trying to advocate for a community yeah, that's what I'll say.
Any other thoughts on that from Manny or Marlon on how we can ensure that CPGs are representative?
Yeah, I understand Zach's point. I do agree that it's not representative. Like, you know, here my planning group is shaping how high rises are going to look, but at the same time, our turnout was like less than 1% of the community. So, you know, I don't disagree with that at all. And I think the most of us in a planning group are fortunate to be in this position. So I welcome the reforms with that in mind, because, you know, while I do acknowledge that having this voice and this input into urban development is great, at the same time, I do acknowledge it's not really a democratic process, and I'm not going to fight any reform to improve it. But, you know, what I do to increase more participation is I always talk about it, you know, with new people that I meet in the community, but neighbors, new businesses that I interact with. I also interact with more of groups, like, for example, like I said earlier, the business improvement districts. I interact with them and I work with them to kind of get them on board or involved in policy. And anyone who I meet who even has a slightest, you know, interest in like street design or urbanism or whatever, I just barrage them with information about planning group. And, like, you know, like what Dike said, try to recruit anyone you can, whether to vote or to be a member, and also just interact with local community groups. try to get a feel of the neighborhood. But yeah, I'll pass it over to Marlon to see if he has anything to say about how we as groups can increase participation.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add that, I used to be the planner for Uptown, and, a turnout of 500 people at the election is a lot of people, especially in that community center. So, I mean, and that was kind of indicative of the community. There was a lot of things going on in terms of, planning issues going on in Uptown. It's a pretty much hotbed for growth over there. So there was a lot of people had a lot of interest in stake. And I think that kind of helps to, I guess, maybe garner a lot of participation in the groups. In instances where we don't maybe have a lot of things going on in communities, but we still want to get more people to join the groups. I think that's kind of where the reform with some of these extra documents that are part of the application, like this community representation and participation plan. What are some of these techniques or tools that community planning group boards could employ to get more people to be involved in the groups? And it could be as simple as, creating, partnerships or talking to the local business district, or, neighbors in the community, or having, bulletin boards or things like that to disseminate information. And, I think one of your questions, Jesse, was like, how else can people join planning groups and get involved? The subcommittees of these planning groups do a lot of the hard work for a lot of the planning groups. They get into kind of the details of reviewing projects, aside from a lot of the other general things that come up at planning groups, but their focus is on the actual project review or design review or historical review. And what's interesting about the subcommittees is that non-planning group members could be part of that subcommittee, because typically we would have a group of less than a quorum of board members, and then the rest of it could be filled by non-planning group members. So there again, kind of allows new members who maybe not completely can get involved in the planning because maybe they don't have the time, but they can definitely participate in some of those more specific projects.
All right, we're almost at the hour. There's a few questions in the chat that I think will be fairly easy to answer, so we're going to try to get through just a couple more things pretty quickly here. Craig Reed said, what areas of the city do not currently have a planning group committee for their neighborhood? I believe everywhere in the city is part of a community planning group. Is that correct?
Not all of them. We do have an excess of planning areas versus planning groups. And there's also some planning areas that are combined with other planning areas. For instance, Carmel Valley and Pacific Highlands Ranch. That's one planning group, or Carmel Valley, Carmel Mountain Ranch and Sabre Springs. Those are combined groups.
Okay. Where is it that there is no community planning group? Do you know that off the top of your head?
I think it has to be some kind of like River Valley area or something like that that doesn't have one. But, it's more of a preservation area, so there's not a lot of things going on there. And usually the adjacent planning group will kind of be the proxy for some of those areas.
Great. RH says, for Marlon, so can new competing groups apply to be recognized that specifically state in their bylaws that they will not hold elections? I believe the answer to that is definitely no, that elections are required. And in fact, there are fairly detailed election procedures that are required.
That's right.
Great. All right, I think that the Jeff Huter asked, can a planning group adopt ranked choice voting? I also like ranked choice voting. I don't know if that's an option. I don't know if you've thought about that, but ranked choice voting is always cool. Marlon, do you know the answer to that?
No, we typically do the straightforward voting.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean,
Cool.
if a group wants to suggest or propose that as part of their procedures, we'll take a look at that. But, the straightforward, simple voting, that's usually pretty standard.
All right. And then the last question that I guess I'll end on, there was a question about if community planning groups are sort of taken outside of the have lost some of their official powers, what's the point in participating in your community planning group? I think that's a great opportunity maybe to frame that in a positive way of like, what is the impact you can have on your community planning group? And so I'll start real quickly just by saying, you know, there's lots and lots of groups that have influence on policies that they care about that do not have any official powers. Circulate San Diego is one of those groups. You know, we don't have any official city powers. We do advocate on policies that we care about, and we do make an impact. Town councils are another example of that. Any other nonprofit, other organization, those are all places where you can have your influence, and community planning groups will continue to have influence as one of those groups. But I'll pass it over to Dike and then Manny to talk about why you will continue to participate in community planning groups.
Because I'm a crazy person. It's kind of like my immediate gut. But no, honestly, I mean, like I said, I've lived in San Diego for 12 years, the entirety in the 92110 zip code. You know, I've been in Midway specifically for almost 9 years now, and it's my home, right? I think for a number of different reasons, I think just based on the way I was raised, like community service is important to me. I think also to a certain extent for me specifically, right? We spent, like I said, these last 4 or 5 years really trying to implement our community plan. We've done a lot of work. And frankly, I don't feel like we've, you know, achieved the results of that work or really seen like, I mean, yes, we've won a couple different ballot measures and that's great. Those definitely aren't bad things, but I don't feel like we've really begun to do the work that we've set out to do. And so for me, I know I'm committed. On the campaign trail, we said a lot of different things and I mean to stand by those. And so, you know, even I see Tom here and you know, I've been emailing back and forth with Tom for the last few days, but I first met Tom when he came out of nowhere, it felt like at the time, to contest against my ballot measure in 2020, right? But we talked about parks, we talked about a lot of the things that we do agree on. And since winning the last time, you know, I've been in Tom's inbox as well saying, hey, you're an expert in this area. What do you think? Here's what I'm thinking. How can you help me help you, right? And so there's a lot that I think goes into being a member of this community. And I know we're short on time, so I'll stop there, but I'm committed and it's mainly because of what we've set out to do. We're not done yet.
Great, thanks, Dike. Manny?
Yeah, you know, the community planning groups will still exist, and even though they don't have official powers, you know, developers are still recommended to present to them. And so when you have them at the table, that is an opportunity for you to say, hey, can you implement XYZ in your project? You know, can you add a bench? Can you add a street light? Can you fix the sidewalk right here? Can you add some tree grates in here and prevent people from tripping? You know, fix this curb cut, you know, that otherwise, you know, you don't really have the say if you're not in a community planning group. You know, it's really hard for as an individual person to reach out to a developer and ask them to implement infrastructure improvements on their block. But when you have in a community planning group, you at least have that forum to invite not just developers, but also the city. If the city wants to build something, you say, hey, can you fix this tree, or, you know, or not fix, plant a tree here, or whatever. That's a really important civic duty to, you know, look out for your community and say like, and whenever there is an opportunity to say, hey, we can implement an improvement here. And that's a really important part. While I'll still continue to be involved, I care really good about good street design and make sure it's safe for people to walk around. And so whenever I get the chance, I'll say like, hey, this sidewalk is broken. Can you at least fix that, you know? So that's a reason I'll keep being involved, just because you get a seat at the table to make suggestions that'll improve your community.
Great, thank you. So thank you again to all of our participants, to Dike, Manny, Marlon. Really appreciate your participation. We will be doing roughly this program again on April 4th on Tuesday. If you have questions that you didn't get answered today, feel free to bring them then. If you have friends who couldn't make it today, please let them know that we're doing it again and we're happy to take questions again. Thanks everyone for coming, and we'll see you another time.
Cool. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everyone.
Really well
Thank you
organized.
all.
Appreciate the invitation.